It's time to talk NFL Draft 2022 Jacksonville Jaguars football, and that means John Oehser at Jaguars.com is back for another visit. John, good to have you back, this time after the draft.
Fantastic. Yeah, it's moving along quick, and the Jaguars had a eventful draft, which is what you do when you pick number one overall, right?
Yeah, and it's really unusual to not only not know who the first pick is going to be the night before the draft or the morning before the draft, but before the draft, before the commissioner goes up there and announces the pick. That's just very unusual, even though when I looked at the Las Vegas odds, and now that I've seen them and they seem to have known something, they were all in on Travon Walker. They had Travon Walker as the favorite by a pretty decent amount, and I was kind of surprised about that. But you did. That was not the direction that it appeared that they would be going when we spoke. And I'm only talking about the name of the player. We talked about edge being definitely, the primary position. But how long did it take you to realize that Travon Walker was becoming a very serious contender for the top spot?
Well, I think Vegas probably had it right. I mean, Vegas is rarely wrong.
Yeah.
And it seemed to go along the lines when the reports would come out. There were a couple of national people that seemed to have their pulse on it pretty well. Of that it was a long process leading to this. There were times early in the process where Evan Neal was sort of the people's choice. And then for a long stretch, once the news came out that they were probably going to retain Cam Robinson, then the people's choice sort of switched to
Hutchinson.
Aidan Hutchinson. And then that was sort of all the mock drafts had Aidan Hutchinson number one. And then about a week and a half or so before the draft, there were reports that, hey, the general manager likes Travon Walker. That was in the air. So once that kind of came out, then everything sort of shifted toward that. And I can't say that by the time they drafted that I was very surprised it was Travon. There were certainly reports like that. There was talk the morning of the draft, hey, this isn't decided. But when they actually made the pick, that had sort of been in the water out there for 7 to 8 days that it was a good possibility. So I think it shocked people who maybe weren't following the draft and weren't on Twitter very closely. But once this thing got to the last few days, you knew there was a good chance it was going to be Travon Walker. And, but number one pick, it does seem in the last decade or so like that had been pretty much known, much more than this one, 4 or 5 days before the draft.
With the new coaching staff, and especially specifically in defense with Mike Caldwell, and even and knowing that the team was going to be a 3-4 defense on most of their snaps, their base defense. Was that? Do you think maybe the kicking point of Walker maybe fits this scheme a little bit better than Hutchinson would?
Well, probably on paper, yes. And I do think what you got to bear in mind, obviously, everybody knows this now. In this day and age, you're only in base, 25% of the time. So Hutchinson certainly in a 3-4 defense, if you can rush the passer, they're going to find a spot for you, especially on the 70% of the downs that are in sub packages. But I think overall, what sort of tipped it was, if you look at Travon Walker, he is an absolute, generational guy physically. I'm not going to say he's a generational player because we don't know what he is yet. But in terms of his physical ability and potential, it's off the charts. He was at minicamp here last week, and it's easy to see why he went number one overall. They don't come down the pike very often looking like this kid. And you package that with the ability to play multiple spots. If you ask him if he had to play with his hand on the ground in a 3-4 and play that big end, you look at him physically, he can do that. If you ask him to rush the passer, you could see him playing off the ball. I don't know if he's a dominant pure pass rusher, but once he gets that 3-4 end down, once he learns the techniques, I can't imagine they're not going to move this kid around, and he's going to be able to play a lot of different things in what they see as a hybrid defense. So that's not going to be the theme or the storyline for the first 8 games, but versatility is a thing for him, and you can certainly use him in a lot of different spots in a 3-4 defense.
Yeah, and I almost get the feeling, and I think this is a lot of people kind of discussed this, and it made sense that, and you look at Walker, because he doesn't have, they were putting up all the historical stats of players drafted at that spot at his position and his low number sack totals and things of that nature, that it was, here you have a very good talent in Aidan Hutchinson, but Travon Walker may not have the production of Hutchinson and may not have the experience yet even of Hutchinson, but his upside, his overall ceiling is that much higher. So even though maybe you're taking a little bit of a risk, maybe it's worth it because this guy has got some sort of freak potential that Hutchinson just doesn't have.
Yeah, and I've never seen Hutchinson up close, so I sort of hate to speak much about him in terms of what they were going on physically with just Walker versus Hutchinson. I saw Walker here last weekend, and the vibe you get looking at him is with his versatility. Yes, there may be some risk when you look at it and say, is he going to be the pure edge rusher that a Joey Bosa or a Nick Bosa were? And okay, I look at him and he's not really that kind of frame. But when you start looking at risk in another sense, which is you draft this kid number 1 overall, which means you better get production and you better be better because of him, right? I mean, that's sort of what you look for. Everybody talks about sacks, but the bottom line for a team is, are you better because this kid's on your roster and on the field? When you look at him, it's awfully hard to think this kid's going to bust.
Sure.
Like, there is going to be a spot for him, and he's going to figure out a way to make you better and make plays. I don't know if that's going to mean 15 sacks. You do look at him and think, this kid's going to figure out a way to disrupt things for you offensively, meaning disrupt the opposing offense. He looks to me comparatively low risk on that front. They're going to figure out some way to use this guy's skill set and make them a better defense. Is that 15 sacks? I don't know. Is that a bunch of disruptions and a bunch of things where it bothers the offense? That's how I think you have to look at Travon Walker.
What the Jags were able to do with the acquisition of Devin Lloyd, moving up to pick him up. I mean, I was so happy and pleased. Somebody that coming to the party as a Jet fan, and so I know what it's like to be a part of a fan base that's used to losing more than winning. And so I have that soft spot for the underdog for obvious reasons there. So when I saw Detroit move up for Jamison Williams and the Jags made the move up for Devin Lloyd, that's what I like to see. I don't want to see New England moving up and getting these guys, and Tampa moving up and getting these guys. So when the Jags moved up and got Devin Lloyd, I was just like, that's great. What a very smart move that was, because Lloyd has like top 10, top 12 draft talent. But because of the position he plays, he slides down the draft board. So talk about how excited the organization was to be able to have the opportunity to trade up and get him.
Yeah, very excited. And I think they were fortunate in this sense. It was at a spot where there was a need too. So it'll be very easy for Lloyd to come in and live up to his draft potential, live up to the hype because of where he's going to play. He also plays a position where he's a runaround guy. He's going to stand out immediately. He can rush the passer. He's going to make an impact, I think, quickly on the stat sheet. He packages a little bit with Travon Walker in this sense. If there was a theme for their first 3 guys on defense, it was versatility. Lloyd is a guy, it's going to be very easy for them to figure out how to use Devin Lloyd. He will start immediately in sub packages. He can put his hand on the ground. He can also he can cover. I agree with you, Greg. Sometimes teams overthink themselves with the draft. Devin Lloyd, anybody you talk to, is a wow player when you watch him on film in college. Probably a top 10 talent if you weren't taking, quote, positional value into play. Yes. He strikes you as a guy, sometimes with the draft, sometimes guys fall in the draft because teams liked other players at the spot and weren't really thinking about that position at that spot. It wasn't necessarily that he didn't deserve to go in the top 26 picks, but teams were sort of picking other guys, meaning picked a bunch of receivers.
Yeah, it happens.
It was a receiver-oriented draft. Picked a bunch of offensive linemen. Probably if you got 32 GMs in a room alone and put them on a lie detector and said, hey, if you were sitting here today and you had Devin Lloyd on your roster as your first-round pick, would you feel pretty confident that he's going to be really, really good for you? They'd probably all go, yeah, he's probably pretty good. But they had to go a different route because of X factor or Y factor, or they needed this, or, well, we just can't justify taking a linebacker top 10. But if you were picking 8th and had him on your roster, you'd probably put your head on the pillow and think, I know I'm getting a good player here.
Yeah.
So to your point, I'm excited about him because I don't think there's any way in the world that this kid's not going to be productive. And, I kind of look at it when Tampa picked Derek Brooks back in 95 or 96, whatever year it was. He strikes he's almost a Derek Brooks type pick. They took Warren Sapp earlier in that draft, remember? And then Derek Brooks was almost the afterthought. Hall of Fame afterthought.
Yeah, absolutely.
I'm not putting Devin Lloyd in the Hall of Fame, but it sort of feels like that a little bit of hard to imagine this not being looked at as a good pick in 5 years.
And then you mentioned the third of the three. There were 3 defenders, and that third one also plays linebacker and Chad Muma. And it's interesting because both Muma and Lloyd, what makes them excel are they're very similar in that they're very good chase linebackers. And so you got 2 guys who are going to just be all over the place, running down players. And Muma may not have the talent of Lloyd. We don't know yet. Of course, he didn't play in the Power 5 like Lloyd did. But you're talking about, again, a guy that has excellent chase ability, an instinctive player with a nose for the ball, and these types of guys you want on your team every day of the week. And now, not only do the Jags have Lloyd, but now they got Muma to go along with their linebacking core. And, of course, the kid that they signed from Atlanta, who only had 180-some-odd tackles last season.
It's going to be interesting to see how it plays out, how they get them all on the field. They don't seem to have any question that all 3 of those guys, meaning the free agent Foy Oluokun, and I'm always botching his name, and I'm going to get it right at some point. But if you package him with Muma and with Lloyd, that's 3 off-the-ball linebackers and a 3-4 defense. They got to figure out a way to get him on the field. They have no doubt they're going to. It sounds to me like Muma and Lloyd are going to be on the field a lot in sub packages, which leads me to believe they're planning on using Lloyd creatively as a pass rusher and letting Muma chase. They are all going to be significant in terms of adding athletic ability to this defense. And what I said through the draft a lot on our local coverage was this. The Jaguars haven't been known in recent years. When you look at them on film, they don't jump out athletically on defense or anywhere on the field. That's why they're 3 and 14. But how do you get better? If you think about the Seattle teams that everybody was so scared of their defenses for years, their linebackers and their safeties could all run. That's how you improve athleticism and dynamic play on defense, is linebackers who can run. They didn't have that enough last year. They added that big time in the draft. it's not a stretch to say that the Jaguars will be significantly more athletic and scary defensively because of these guys, if these guys are what they think they drafted.
Okay, now I just want to mention one other linebacker since we're on linebackers. He wasn't drafted, but and we're going to talk about a few of these rookies that were signed. Grant Morgan. And I knew Morgan wouldn't be a draftable type of player, but this is the kind of guy you want on your football team. He'd probably make the practice squad. Who knows? Maybe he slips because the special teams onto the active roster, but he was a third-team All-America in 2020, and he won the Burlsworth Award for the top former walk-on in college football. So this is a former team captain. You want these guys left and right on your team, especially when you don't even have to draft them.
Yeah, and how many times in the NFL over the years do you see undrafted linebacker, uber productive in college, figures out a way? They often don't get drafted because you don't have to draft them, because it goes back to why Lloyd slipped. It's not a premium position anymore in the draft, but that guy produce. Worst guys, obviously, to have on your practice squad. He was an all SEC guy, and as you said, the Burlsworth Award is the former walk-on. You would think he's the kind of guy who's going to figure out a way to stick and figure out a way to be around. And then all of a sudden, this Jaguars team has not been deep in a long time. All of a sudden, are you deep at linebacker on this team? It sure feels like they will be. I don't know enough about this kid to speak very much about him in terms of what I saw at minicamp, because you're talking about a minicamp where you're not going to see a lot from linebacker. Yeah. But they clearly believe that position, they like their front around here. Doug Peterson's talked about it a lot. He thought the front 5, 7, however you play, was a strength. They've added a lot to what he already thought was a strength.
Okay, now with their last two picks, staying on defense, with the two corners. Now, I don't know much myself about Gregory Jr., but I do know about Matterick Brown, who, by the way, played defense with Grant Morgan at Arkansas. And I always felt Brown was going to be was going to have to come into the NFL and prove himself, because he doesn't have the measurables you're looking for. But what he is he's got excellent ball skills. He's somebody that, just like Morgan, production, first team SEC. What our lad says about him on the scouting report is it's important that he though finds his way on a team that uses him in zone. Now, I don't know whether or not that's what the Jags are going to use him for, right, but he had a 5th round grade and they got him in the 7th round.
Yeah, and in looking at both Junior and Brown, they looked like they fit in the NFL during rookie camp. I mean, they didn't look out of place. Physically, they had the measurables that are fine in the NFL. So it's hard to say how they want to use them. What you do look at with Brown, where he fits what else this Jaguars draft fits, is production in college. And I know when I say that, Walker didn't have the sacks in college, but when you looked at him perform at Georgia, performed at a high level on the field. Same way with Brown at Arkansas, 5 picks as a senior, showed that he could do it at this level. That seemed to have been the direction Balky went. I can't say very much about how they plan to use a 7th round pick, but it was certainly a spot with the Jaguars when you looked at their secondary. Darius Williams, Shaquille Griffin, Tyson Campbell, those are going to be their 3 guys. They needed special teams guys, and they needed numbers at the cornerback position. They went after that in the last 2 rounds of the draft.
And there's also, who knows, the possibility based on how good he plays against the run, and because he is really good with has excellent ball skills, that maybe he could play safety as well.
Sure.
But that's what you want with a 7th round draft pick. If you can get somebody versatile like that, first team SEC player. I mean, come on, 7th round. I thought that was a bargain. Now let's talk about the final 2 players that were drafted, both on offense. Luke Fortner was the center that was drafted into 3rd round with the first pick of the 3rd round. And you look at a guy like this, and he's got the versatility to play both guard spots. He played center in his final year at Kentucky. You're talking about a power center as opposed to an athletic center. So, was there a specific reason that the Jags kind of liked this player enough to draft him as early as they did?
Yeah, one of the reasons is that their center, Brandon Linder, just retired. So I wouldn't call it a hole there because Tyler Shatley, who they signed, 9-year veteran, he's been the swing guy for 8 or 9 years around here. He's been the guy you could always rely on to play guard and center. He's under contract. They're fine with him starting, but he's also in his 9th year. So Fortner was drafted to play center. At number 65 overall, they are in no way saying that he will start off as the starter. But when you're drafted 65 overall as an interior lineman, you were drafted to start at some point and start for a long time. They think he's capable of that. He's graduating from Kentucky with 3 degrees. He's uber smart. He made a lot of the line calls for them. He's comfortable doing that. Intelligence-wise, they believe he can come in here and get it very quickly. I'd be surprised if he's not. It would not be unusual, and it's expected that halfway through the season he's being earmarked as the starter for a long time. I don't know when that transition would take place because there's a lot in the NFL that a young center has to learn. He's supposed to be the starting center around here for a long time, and again, in rookie camp he looked fine. SEC, you would think he can make the transition. They like him a lot as a guy who can run that offensive line for a long time.
And what's interesting is that the center that they signed in free agency, Nick Ford out of Utah, a lot of the same characteristics as Fortner. A powerful player, a very smart player, a versatile player, can play guard, can play center, 2-time first-team Pac-12 center. Again, a very productive player that the team was able to grab in free agency. And I could easily see Ford as one of these other type of non-drafted kids that actually has a chance to make the team.
Yeah, and as you know, the way that usually works, guys, many free agents make teams if not being drafted anyway. But it's a high percentage of guys who are in the positions we're talking about. Linebacker, corner, interior offensive line. Tyler Shatley, who's been the 8 or 9 year swing guy around here, was drafted the same year Brandon Linder, who was the starter forever at center, was drafted. They kind of go hand in hand sometimes. You draft the guy, and then you've got the backup who's almost as good as that guy, but he sticks for a long time. Wouldn't surprise you at all if Ford and Fortner were that same kind of combination. This team has needed to get younger, deeper on the offensive line. I shouldn't say I'd be shocked if it doesn't happen because you're undrafted free agent, you don't know.
Sure.
That seems like a very logical combination. Ford comes in. He's got the capability of playing both spots. Could he be around a long time? Sure.
Okay, and then to wrap it up, we're skill position players. The draft pick was the running back Snoop Connor. Now, Connor and running back is just it's such a deep position every year, and you just never know where these guys are going to go. And it's always preference, obviously, with the general manager and the scheme and the team. And why did you want that guy? So when you look at Snoop Connor, you see a guy that, I mean, is he going to be like that third down back that's going to, with reliable hands, that's going to give that team the opportunity to, hey, I can get the ball out to him. He can accelerate fast after he catches the ball, that kind of thing. Is he going to be that kind of a role player? Maybe play on special teams, of course, or do they have something else in mind with the kid?
I would think it's a little tricky with running back here because, as we talked about when we talked in March, Travis Etienne and James Robinson are both. Yep. Etienne's a high-level talent. James Robinson has been high-level production. But James Robinson is coming off an Achilles, probably won't be ready until training camp. Travis Etienne's coming off a Liz Frank. He's been participating in the offseason, looks like he's going to be ready. But both of those injuries for backs, you got to make sure they're right. There's no reason to think they won't be right, but they're lower leg serious injuries. So they needed a back in the draft to supplement that. Snoop Connor played, who was productive at Ole Miss. He also scored 13 touchdowns at Ole Miss in 1 year. I think it was this last year. So has a knack for the goal line, can be a short yardage guy as well. If both of those guys come back, meaning Etienne and Robinson, Connor would certainly have a role potentially on the goal line, can play that sort of role. So it's a little bit of a safeguard pick. He can play a role if one of them's not ready. He can be in the rotation, but also has a role if they're both playing at a high level. So, again, 5th-round running back. How much do you see out of him at rookie camp? Not a lot to see, but that's how they envision him, as a guy who can carry the ball if needed, but also has a role if the other two guys are there and can play special teams.
And then the two players that stuck out for me that were signed, Kevin Austin out of Notre Dame. How can he not stand out? Not only because of his physical, you just take a look at him, and I mean, he's got a great combination of size and speed and length. I mean, he's 6'2", 200 with a 4.37 40, and how does this guy not get drafted?
Right.
He was a 4th-round grade for our lads, but then you do look at the fact that there were a couple of issues. One was the fact that he has limited playing experience. He only really played one good year, which was his last year. He had those early career character concerns. Plus, he had multiple foot surgeries. So all of those things might have scared off some teams to invest a draft pick on him. But he's got a chance to maybe be the 6th receiver on this team.
Well, undrafted free agency is always intriguing to me. There's an element of crapshoot to it because you're signing guys who are undrafted. The other side of it is there are also always situations around the league where it makes perfect sense for the better free agents at their positions to go to that team. With wide receiver, that's certainly one of them. Jacksonville made sense. If you consider Austin the best wide receiver available in unrestricted free agency, which some people did, for all the reasons you cite. Jacksonville, they have Christian Kirk, they have Laviska Shenault, they have their 5 are probably set.
Yes.
But that 6th, where it's perfectly conceivable that they keep a guy, there's an opportunity open. Kevin Austin, I would think, would be on this roster unless he proves quickly that he doesn't belong. You follow me?
Yep.
It won't be a situation where he doesn't get a look, where there's not an opportunity, where he gets released because there's too many good players on the roster. There's a spot for him. I thought they would draft a receiver earlier than they did, but once they got past that first 7 or 8 guys, they didn't think that there were really guys in the draft who were automatically going to come in and knock guys out of their rotation. Kevin Austin's a guy who can come here, play on the practice squad, possibly make the team. If he's good enough, there will certainly be room in the rotation quickly for him, if that makes any sense.
Sure. And if they're not able to swing the trade for Devin Lloyd, then who knows? Then the possibility of...
I think people thought they were going to take receiver there. You started hearing before the draft about this team that they kind of thought those first 6 or 7 guys were the guys who could go, or the 8 who got drafted in the first round. They started thinking those guys were going to be gone before they were going to be able to get up and go get them. And then once they got there, they felt like it sort of dropped off. And they didn't really want to make a trade for a receiver who didn't have potential to turn into a 1. So they kind of got caught between a rock and a hard place there in the draft with wide receiver. It felt like that to me anyway.
Well, when we preview the season in a few months, one of the things that we'll touch up on is that they might have one of the most underrated receiving corps in the league, talent-wise on paper. You mentioned Shenault, and then Zay Jones is a player that not many people know about, and his ability is there. So there are some players, a couple of those guys right there I just mentioned, that have the opportunity to really break out if the quarterback and the team has the type of season that everybody hopes for. When we wrap up, there's 2 other players I just want to bring up that were signed. and actually just one other player, because we just talked about Austin. That was Garrett Prince, the tight end. Definite practice squad kind of guy, but he broke out last year, 10 touchdowns with the thing that stuck out, he had a 19.4 average. That led all tight ends nationally by more than nearly 2 yards per reception. So that meant the next tight end's average per catch was around 17.5 or something. That shows you the kind of year Garrett Prince had. But he'd have to be used more as a chess piece kind of guy based on his size. So, if they can find a way to use this kid in the next year or two and he develops, then he might be interesting. But, it's just somebody to keep an eye on based on the kind of year he had last year.
Yeah, no doubt. And Doug Peterson has a reputation for developing tight ends and certainly using them in the offense. They love Evan Ingram, unrestricted free agent signing. They think he's sort of the X factor in their free agent class. As much as we talk about the roster and strengths, and there are some strengths on this roster, the reality is this team was 3-14 last year.
Yeah.
So they're probably not going to be in a hurry to release good players, Greg, is what I'm getting at. So there will be opportunities for a player such as him. There'll be opportunities for undrafted free agents here. Their free agents are set up, their unrestricted free agents are set up so that, Evan Ingram's not signed to a long-term deal. If you get young players at that position who develop quickly, there will be places for those guys in this franchise in the short and long term, I guess is what I'm trying to say.
All right. Now, was there a player that I haven't mentioned or a player that might be last year's rookie free agent that is about, you think, to maybe could take a next step before we get into training camp? Because by the time we talk, we're probably going to be already into training camp. So
right.
If any of the Jags fans watching, can you give him a player that, hey, you know what, keep an eye on this guy because from what I've either seen already this year and what I've heard about, or a player that really looked good last year that might make a name for himself this year?
Yeah, it's tough out of the free agents because I don't know that there were guys like that, and I'm going through them, and I don't want to force the answer.
Sure.
I look at Tyson Campbell's second-round pick, started and looked like he's about to take a step into maybe being really, really good. They signed so many unrestricted free agents that I think a lot of the guys that might fall into that category usually, they've signed guys to play big-time roles. So I don't know that anybody quite fits that the way it might on a team that had been better last year because they were in such transition that they really went out and they signed a bunch of unrestricted free agents. Signed Darius Williams as an unrestricted free agent to come in to be the nickel guy. Hard to imagine any corner is going to come in and be one of the top three. So probably not, although at the same time, I'm probably missing somebody, and some fan will look at it and say, hey, you missed that.
I'll throw a player out there. How about, and he was drafted in the 4th round last year, Jordan Smith. Does he?
Yeah, he would be a guy who could. We saw nothing from him last year in terms of wasn't on the field at all. They loved his ability when he was drafted. A 4th round pick, didn't really make any noise. He was active late. Hasn't been a whole lot of buzz, but you can always use edge rushers.
Yeah.
The opportunity will be there if he develops. It's a huge training camp for him because last year feels kind of lost for so many people. There will be opportunity there for him to show it. I got to wait until the pads go on to say much about it.
And then 2 other quick things before I let you go. E.J. Perry. So here's the quarterback that was signed to the to after the draft. Was a Boston College kid, transferred to Brown. So the level of play obviously down. But he led the FCS in total offense in 2019. He set Ivy League records in total offense. Led the team in rushing and was the offensive MVP of the Shrine Bowl this past year with 3
Yep.
touchdowns. A very good athlete. But obviously a guy that needs to develop. They don't need a quarterback. We understand that. But every team looks for long-term backups. So he could be interesting to keep an eye on, and you would think that he'd be a guy that they would stick on the practice squad to see if they could develop him down the road.
It'd be surprising if he's not on the practice squad. Remember, Doug Peterson played when he played. He was a career backup. Spent a lot of time in Green Bay as Favre's backup. This was back when that system developed a lot of quarterbacks.
Yeah.
If you remember,
Yep.
Mark Brunell was traded, became the Jaguars quarterback. Ty Detmer, guys along those lines. So Doug comes from an environment where you believe in developing quarterbacks behind a great quarterback. This kind of fits with that. He believes in it strongly enough where when he was talking about this during rookie minicamp, he said that he's talked a lot since he got here about the value of having a lot of good guys at that position. You can trade them. It's always good to have them in the system. He believes in it. He fits that. Again, C.J. Beathard, the backup here, hard to believe he won't be the backup next year. Beyond that, there's Jake Luton. Certainly, this is a franchise. I'll put it this way, because I know I'm long-winded on this answer. Some franchises don't believe in carrying 3. They believe in carrying 2. With Doug Peterson around, you got to believe he is going to fight for roster spots and for equity to be put into the position behind Trevor Lawrence.
And then lastly, and we've talked about him quite a bit over the last couple of years, we're going to talk about him again as maybe a primary topic when we preview the season, and that is how this has got to be a defining training camp for Travon Chaisson. And I'm sure not being in Jacksonville, not knowing what the fans are talking about, but I have to believe that he's been pretty big on the list of players that the fans talk about over ever since he's been drafted.
Yeah, not really. I mean, what's kind of funny is, I say funny because Travon's a talented kid. They had him at edge rusher, has not really carved out a niche, started 8 games last year, and frankly sort of disappeared. It's a big training camp for him. I think expectations among the fans are pretty low because they've seen nothing from him.
Okay.
So I think a lot of fans sort of assume he's not going to do much.
Okay.
I don't know that that's a fair assumption, but it is fair, I think, for fans not to know what to expect. Is he an edge rusher? Is he an off-the-ball linebacker? Where does he fit? I wish I had a better answer on Travon. I don't exactly know where he fits. I know that he's too talented not to be given an opportunity. It's a storyline that I plan to dive way into during the OTAs because you got to figure that Mike Caldwell, the defensive coordinator, comes in and wants to know how he can use him. It'll be one of the first questions I ask Mike Caldwell when he's talking is, where does he fit? What are the plans? I don't know the answer well enough to tell you, Greg, but I know you want to get value and production out of a kid who was drafted number 20 overall. Huge offseason for him, no question.
Yeah, and hey, good for the Jag fans because if again, being a Jet fan, if that was a first-round draft pick who had done pretty much nothing at this point, I mean, they would be trashing him left and right, and it would be it's unfortunate because like, hey, why are you wasting your time talking about somebody that's not producing and doesn't even get on the field or isn't? But that's some of these fan bases, they have a whipping boy, and so
well. There's been and again, I like Travon, and I still think he's got a chance to be a productive NFL player. He's an honest kid who'd be the first one to tell you hasn't done enough. Is that opportunity? Is that whatever? Why haven't Jaguars fans talked about it? Well, there's been a lot of things to not like.
Yeah.
So I think that's just not very high on the list.
That makes sense.
So I'm still intrigued by him because there's a lot of talent there, and it still looks to me like there is production to get out of him. I wonder how it'll happen. And again, I think it's a huge storyline for the next 3 months.
John, appreciate it as always. You are going to be right now. Is it more like mini camp and all that kind of stuff? And when do you start kind of zeroing in on getting ready for training camp?
Well, OTAs are first, and then it's a short off season for the Jaguars. They play in the Hall of Fame game, so it's about 3 or 4 weeks between OTAs ending and then this team coming back. So I'll be gearing up, probably mid-June, getting mentally ready, and it'll be my 28th. So
wow.
At some point, I'll have to get physically ready.
Yeah.
I'm not as young as I used to be.
All right, John. Well, so far so good. I can tell you that. Great job as always. Appreciate it. Thanks for your time, and I look forward to talking, I should say, more about Jacksonville Jaguars football in the next few months before the season begins.
Look forward to it, Greg. Thank you.